Well, thank you everybody for joining us today. For those of you I'm meeting for the first time, face to face, my name's Scott Arrieta. I'm the CEO of Unity and Company. We're a training, coaching, and consulting firm that leverages a strategic understanding of human experiences to help organizations unlock best-in-class performance. And so just as a little bit of background, we host events like this about 2 to 3 times per quarter. And our goal in these is really just to connect senior leaders in the industry and share insights that spark conversations and hopefully get a free exchange of ideas and best practices that you can bring back to your organizations, as well as maybe cultivate some professional relationships as well. So before we get started, these events are designed, hey, Annie, to be highly interactive. So please feel free to jump in if you have any questions or if you have perspectives to share. That's really the value of these, is so that you all can learn from each other's combined experiences. So feel free to share anything that you might be helpful for the group. So in today's executive forum, we're going to be discussing why most leadership training efforts fail and how talent development leaders can help to buck this trend and ensure that your investments in leadership training actually drive value and impact. So before we get started, since this is going to be a really interactive session, I think it's best if we do at least some brief introductions. So let's go around the room. I'd love it if you could all just share your name, your role, and what company or industry you work for. If you don't want to share the company specifically, whatever's the most comfortable for you. Now, we do have a couple of members from the Unity team here today. So I've already gone. Let's start with my team, and we'll kick it off with Michelle.
Hi, everyone. I am Michelle Alex. I am head of data and insights for Unity and Company. Brief background. I come with a lot of psychology background. So I started in clinical and counseling psychology, then moved over to organizational psychology. So basically have a master's in statistics and evaluation. So a lot of the work I do in general and with Unity is around how do we show the impact of the work that we're doing, especially when it comes to measuring people, which is not a clear-cut number all the time. So I'm here to help kind of unpack all of that.
Right, Monica.
My name is Monica Arrieta. I've come from a very long career in large primarily in the tech and financial services space. And my specialty right now is primarily focused around coaching in the somatic coaching space. So that's the body-mind connection and how we get different results by changing the way that we think and work.
Great. I'll move on to Bill.
Hey, Scott, everybody. My name is Bill Tingle, and I was a chief information officer for years, came up through the IT and technology space. I now lead an IT advisory practice here out of Fairfax, Virginia, and it's good to be on with you all.
Awesome. And Mandy, how about you next?
My name is Mandy Kuchide. I'm the VP for Talent and Culture at Exponent Partners. We are a small professional services SaaS company in the information systems, Salesforce partnership space. We're a B Corp. I've been doing HR for 15 years and kind of that social impact nonprofit higher ed space.
Very cool. Thank you, Mandy. Annie?
Hi, my name is Annie Brown. I am in Austin, Texas, and right now I'm at a company called Phi as their head of people and culture. It's a smart dog collar company where basically you GPS track and ideally learn behaviors from your dog to help them live happier lives.
Annie, I've been meaning to talk to you about this, but I need to get one of those for our French bulldog because I'm constantly worried he's going to run out the door and never come back. So
I love it. Yeah, let's do that.
All right. Jamie?
Hi, good afternoon. Jamie Dubke. I'm here in Dallas, Texas. I'm a transformation advisor for hospital systems and really looking to help revolutionize training and development in the healthcare space.
Very cool. Thanks for joining us, Jamie. And Gabby?
Hi. Yeah, so sorry again for not having my camera on, but my name's Gabby Bruno. I work for a company called Bodify. We're in the SaaS space. We do search engine optimization. I'm actually based in Arlington, Virginia, so really close to Fairfax, Virginia. But yeah, excited to be here. And I'm very new to the HR career, so excited to kind of listen and learn from you guys.
Awesome. Thanks for joining us, Gabby. Okay, well, now that we all know a little bit about each other, without further ado, let's kick off our time today. And I'm going to start with a question for y'all. Next slide. All right. So on a scale of 1 to 10, how important do you all feel that leadership training is to your organization's future success? You can go ahead and put your answers in the chat. And then if any of y'all want to expand on that, we'll have some time for discussion. Solid 10, solid 10. Great. Any dissenters? Solid 10. All right. Okay. Well, I might be preaching to the choir here, but just in case y'all need a little ammo, like what we see sometimes with working with organizations is, within the HR and talent development space, there's a high level of conviction of the importance of leadership training as a function and an enabler of future growth and innovation. But sometimes that perspective might not be shared universally with the rest of the C-suite or with the rest of the people in leadership. But that being said, I think it comes as no surprise that leadership training in general is one of the key enablers that helps companies it's the difference between success and oftentimes just, acrimony and conflict and ultimate failure in companies. But there's perhaps never been a time where that is true more than today. So here at Unity & Company, we believe that when it comes to meeting the demands of tomorrow, the future belongs to organizations who prioritize developing their talent today. And there's a reason that we believe in this so strongly. So according to a study that was published by the World Economic Forum, an estimated 50% of workers need to be upskilled or reskilled by 2025. So that's just around the corner. But other studies that approach this same problem with a longer lens place that percentage at over 90% by the year 2030. And so those numbers seem astronomical, but when you stop to think about what's happened in the world in the last 5 to 10 years, it becomes a lot more plausible and realistic. Because simply put, our world has changed dramatically and permanently. First of all, the pandemic has taken a toll on workers, which is placing increased strain on leaders and individual contributors in a myriad of ways. According to a recent study by Gartner, 60% of employees report experiencing significant amounts of stress daily, resulting in decreased productivity and engagement and increased conflict and attrition. Next up, hybrid and remote work models have dramatically changed how we work together. The same Gartner study revealed that 58% of organizations have already invested in process tech and organizational changes to enable remote work, and another 33% are planning significant investments in the next 1 to 2 years. So this is a vast majority of companies in the marketplace are looking to implement some kind of remote work. And as many of you who have experimented with remote working models probably know, it takes different competencies, skills, ways of working, processes in order to do remote work effectively. And then, of course, there's the rise of AI and automation technologies that's driving a redistribution of skills that organizations need to develop in order to remain competitive. As a lot of entry level or rote and mundane tasks are being outsourced to AI and automation, it requires us to develop and cultivate different skills and hire for different roles. And lastly, there's a generational composition of our workforce. There are up to 5 generations actively employed in the workforce today. And each of these generations is vastly different set of perspectives, expectations, and skills. And all of these things have a deep implication for talent development leaders, getting everybody to work effectively together and to just get along. And this generational composition is in a state of constant flux as more traditionalists and baby boomers are exiting the workforce. They're vacating these mid and senior leadership positions that younger generations are just frankly collectively not ready to take on yet. A study by DDI, it's a global leadership consulting firm, reveals that most HR executives assess that their bench strength is at an all-time low. And this is probably likely to continue as older generations enter retirement at rates that younger generations just can't keep up with because of the math involved. So hopefully all of these things make a very clear case for why we feel that leadership development investments are absolutely vital for organizations that want to remain competitive in the future. But before we move on, we go to the next slide. Question for all of you. How have your organizations responded to these challenges, and how big of a role has leadership development played in that response?
You want us to raise our hands or just talk, Scott?
No, just talk. Go for it.
I was, I guess I'm going to go back to when I was a CIO, because it wasn't that long ago. And I think it was, leadership development was probably one of the most underinvested areas. And I think it was either like one of several things would happen. One is either it was common sense, like you should just know how to do it, or you should have already learned it by now. Somebody else, either you should have taught yourself, it should have been done someplace else, or a program was developed that didn't deliver the results.
Yeah.
When I was at a major car rental company, there was a significant amount of money invested in leadership development. And I think the problem, it was like a lot of familiar bodies of knowledge, but there was it was more like traditional school. Like here's the information, learn it, and then go do it. And it was missing something that would lead to embodiment of knowledge.
Yeah.
And I mean, I have a whole set of different opinions about that today, but so there was definitely, in my experience, just definitely missing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Really good insights, Bill. Any responses to that or other insights on the table?
I think what I have seen at different places, and I shifted to a remote work environment right before the pandemic. So coming out of higher ed where we didn't have resources and time. So training felt like it was one of the first things to often get cut, right? No matter how much I would advocate at the cabinet level, that was the thing that we could do without. So in the midst of, reduction in forces and large number debts, that was the thing that slid. And then moving into the tech SaaS space, there were more resources for it. So it was easier to advocate and get that funding and the time, even if there was lost opportunity costs from the time set aside for employees that were billable. But the real challenge was, how do we connect that to the business needs, and how are we upskilling for the right skills that we know are coming, so that there's a real connection to the work. I found that is like the hard piece for us, is how do we really build that connection for folks so they see the value.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and even just defining like what are the right skills to train on. It's like, do you have any insights on how that conversation went? Just aligning everybody that these are the skill sets that we think are going to drive the most impact. Because that's where I feel like a lot of companies don't even get, started, because there's like a fundamental miscalibration amongst the people making the decisions about what do you want to train? Do you want technical training? Do you want soft skills training? Do you want competency-based training?
Yep. And we're still, I feel like we've, as an exec team, have had that conversation for a year and have not gotten on the same page. It's like half want technical, half want functional. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, spoiler alert, that's one of the mistakes that we see very common coming up later in the presentation. But yeah, very cool. Any other perspectives? Okay. Thank you guys for contributing. I think that's a pretty good place to start. So I think it's important to just ask ourselves, I mean, we all have basically unanimous conviction that leadership training is vital to our organization's success. And we represent a broad range of industries and operational contexts here, but that is the common thread that we all have conviction about. But given how important leadership training is to organizational success, the question is why do so many leadership training efforts fail? I think Bill's example is really astute that, oftentimes leadership trainings are developed. They may be well conceived in terms of like the skills and competencies and learning objectives and outcomes, but more often they're not, right? And then once the training has been implemented, there's also typically kind of a lack of resolution and clarity on how we're going to measure success. And so it really kind of just leaves it up to the eye of the beholder to evaluate whether a success exists or not, right? And so there is a sentiment out there that leadership training efforts are largely ineffective, but I think we can break down what are some of the common missteps, and then how do we design our future leadership training efforts so that we're as immune from these factors as possible. So we think here at Unity that the root causes of why leadership trainings fail or are perceived to fail really fall into three main categories: content and facilitation, reinforcement and sponsorship, and data and strategy. So I'm going to start our deep dive with content and facilitation mistakes that we see when we're working with our clients and prospective organizations. So when we work with clients, we often see that they're initially interested in developing content around skills and process and adherence, instead of investing in the development of, and I'll use these air quotes very sarcastically, soft skills, which are actually far more effective at driving results across the organization. In fact, we prefer the term power skills to soft skills for this exact reason. Simply put, they are an organization's secret weapon to not only produce better productivity and innovation outcomes, but an organization that has a base of leaders who are skilled practitioners of power skills is also laying a strong foundation for culture and engagement that pays ongoing and multiplicative dividends. So let's go to the next slide. I'll show you guys some data. This is again from that study from DDI that I referenced earlier. This shows you where the biggest leadership gaps currently are. And these are self-reported by the leaders themselves. Now go ahead and take a quick scan here. So urgent future gaps. Building talent can be considered a skill, but managing change, power skill. Strategic thinking and influencing, power skills. Leading virtually, a power skill. Leading across generations, power skill there too. Driving for results, communication, coaching and developing others. The power skills really abound. This is where leaders self-assess that they need the most help. And yet, I do think that these are the areas that get persistently overlooked when organizations are looking to develop training programs and deploy them internally. Let's go to the next slide. All right, so regrounding ourselves on this list here, the next step is just too much content. So because of budgetary considerations, we find that organizations try desperately to try to maximize their value, or at least that's what they think they're doing, by cramming a ton of content into as little time as they can manage. And to an extent, this is understandable. Training costs time and money. Mandy, you talked about that in terms of the offset of billable hours. But in reality, it's better to be a lot more selective and cover fewer topics in a way that produces really deep engagement with the material versus overwhelming participants by boiling the ocean. Another trend we see is organizations moving aggressively to on-demand or virtual learning experiences versus instructor-led experiences, primarily because they're trying to save on budget. Now, at Unity, we know that virtual modalities can be highly effective for certain use cases, and we've seen great success with our clients who leverage these modalities strategically versus being primarily motivated by budget. But the key here is picking it strategically as the correct modality, not just the cheapest modality. Next up, training that's too generic can significantly inhibit participants' ability to engage with the material in a meaningful way. So here at Unity, for our live in-person instructor-led sessions, we insist that at a minimum, we customize every training engagement to reflect our clients' mission, vision, and values, their strategic goals, and that all of our knowledge reinforcement activities reflect scenarios that are tailored to their specific operating context, so that our participants can really see themselves in the material. And what we find in our verbatims after the engagements we do is that the vast majority of our participants say that the difference between our trainings and other trainings is that they can see immediate applicability in what they learn in the classroom. And it's because we take the care to not just give them generic scenarios and examples. And the last 2 points are mainly facilitation related. So the importance of good facilitation to training effectiveness just can't be overstated. A master facilitator is responsive to the needs of the participants. They have off the charts EQ. They know the content backwards and forwards. And so they can dynamically adjust their style, their timing, their flow, and their methods to the needs of the audience specifically. So that was the list that we came up with. What do you all think about the list? I mean, do you have any additions, revisions, spicy contrarian points of view?
A couple things jumped out at me that sounded really good. One was the too much content, because that resonates with me. That there's this concept of trying to get your return on the investment and get as much for your money as possible. But I would agree with you that less high value, like having less content, and what is left of higher value is really good. And then I love what you said about customizing for mission, values, culture. I mean, that just makes total sense.
Yeah, thank you. I think it just, all of those things make a huge difference for sure. Annie, did you have something to add?
Just that in general, I also thoroughly agree with all of these. One recent training that I went through as a trial for I won't name the company, the facilitator did not pick up on the fact that you could tell the attendees were like, this is too basic. Like, it was a very kind of fundamental skill training. And the people on the call ended up being people that had, 20, 30 years experience. And so it fell flat, because when they would ask questions, like, no one was really engaging. And so I noticed that the leader or the facilitator did not adjust their style to adapt to that. And so it felt, you walked away feeling like it was meh. The only other thing I would say that I really love in trainings that I've seen really well done are some sort of interactive, like real-time practice, especially if you're working on some sort of skill development, like bringing scenarios from a situation that you're dealing with currently at work has really resonated with people. And I've seen people have great unlocks in those trainings. So that's one more thing I would add.
Yeah, the hands-on experience it's so important for a couple of reasons, Annie, because like you said, it really helps with the practical application. There's a difference, to Bill's point, between conceptual mastery, which is what we learn in school, right, and practical mastery, which is what we learn out in the workforce, right? And in that way, I think like our traditional approaches to education are actually not serving us like when we get into the workplace, because it's not a knowledge in, behavior out equation. It's like you need to drip little pieces of bite-sized knowledge onto people, but then let them do most of their learning by actually engaging with the material. And to Bill's earlier point about too much content, if you have too much content, you just don't have the luxury of time to allow people to engage with that material. But then the other thing that's really interesting, Annie, is that, when you do create space for people to like role play and engage and make mistakes and potentially fumble some concepts, there's almost like a shared experience approach to that, where participants, the bonds that they have with each other coming out of training are bonds that they continue kind of to develop and invest in the workplace. And what we see with our clients is just a lot more collaboration coming out of training, especially these highly interactive trainings, because people are just friends, to be honest. Like, we're making friendships that are having actual business impact, which is super cool.
I think there's something really important that you said right there, Scott, about because what I've seen work well with leadership training, especially at that like middle management, emerging leader tier, is opening with some type of vulnerability moment so that there is like a shared knowledge of each other's skill sets too, because that can build some cohesion, and then that team starts to network and they're breaking down silos. And when that goes well, I see it work so beautifully.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And that's the goal, really. Awesome. Thank you, guys. Really great insights. All right. So moving on, even the best designed leadership training experiences can fail to produce results if there's a lack of reinforcement and internal sponsorship. So like the environment that we create in the classroom is one thing. It's great. It could be fantastic and develop all of these friendships, but eventually you got to leave the classroom. You have to go back to the real world. And many times when we're working with clients, we find that they're eager to invest in training for entry to mid-level leaders, but they don't initially see the need to bring a similar experience to like their director plus population. And the problem with this is that without those shared experiences and buy-in, the participants who are engaged and excited and hopeful in the classroom soon become really disenfranchised when they get back to their desks and they realize that everyone who has not been through the training seems to be playing from a different rule book, and they're using a different lexicon, and they're not bought into the same ideas. And that can have a truly detrimental impact. In fact, it can have a counter effective impact where people's engagement could be lower than it was before training, even if the training was good, because, their hopes come up and then come crashing down. So Amy Edmondson, some of you may know her. She's a professor of leadership at Harvard Business School. She's kind of one of the pioneers and work on trust and psychological safety in the workplace. But she calls this the fertile soil concept. So in order for the seeds of change to take root in an organization, senior leaders across that organization must sponsor and create the conditions for growth. So they have to be the torchbearers of what is being taught in the classroom. Otherwise, change is not going to take root. This also relates to another common misstep, which is pouring all available resources into classroom or virtual training and then failing to invest in coaching and ongoing reinforcement after the fact, which is key to knowledge retention and behavior change. And again, a lot of this is because of either budgetary purposes or just a lack of an internal coaching competency that causes organizations to kind of pull their punches on this step. And lastly, we work with a lot of organizations who have historically overlooked the potential for a well-designed training experience to be a tool for cultural reinforcement that drives strong internal relationships and ongoing engagement. So this is what I was talking about earlier with like the friendships kind of created in these environments. So we recently completed an engagement with a client who reported noticeably higher levels of engagement from our classroom participants once they got back to their daily work, because those friendships and those experiences and the shared language that they developed in that classroom created really strong bonds that have dramatically increased collaboration. And like, this is the secret sauce, between departments that previously didn't work well together at all, right? So giving them a shared experience where they were shoulder to shoulder instead of being adversarial in terms of their department functions, their budgets, their goals, right? Really helped to kind of grease the wheels and help with engagement after training. So what insights do y'all have on the importance of reinforcement and sponsorship? Any anecdotes, stories?
Yeah, one of the things that really resonated, that in one of my experiences, the company made a pretty big investment in management and leadership development, and I had recommended that the leadership team also take the training to show support and to show like we're gonna walk the talk too. And the thought was, no, there's no need for us to do that. Let's, let the lower level people take it. And it was so detrimental to not force or require the senior leadership team to go through it, because it created a greater chasm And then the big thing was the senior leadership team had no clue what was being taught. They didn't have the language. They didn't have, even if they had a lot of experience, they weren't aligned around the language and the practices and the unique attributes of the program. And so I just think that's so important that the senior team make an investment in going through it as well.
Yeah.
We did it up. I don't know if this is the right way, but it was really interesting to watch what happened. We, at a larger professional services company that I was at early on in my career, my vice president was magical. So she was putting together this program, knew there was a need for the director level training. It was going to be a year long. It was application based. She gathered a lot of excitement. She knew she wanted executive sponsors for each of the participants. So she got her exec team to be like fully engaged on board. They had to meet with their exec sponsor weekly. By the end of that program, all the executives were like, we want a program. So then we developed the same thing at the exec level. And it was beautiful. I wasn't expecting that. And then we rolled it out to individual contributors and managers and kind of downward. But the fact that she sort of got them a little jealous and they were like, oh, we want this at the exec team was really cool. It was fun to watch. Seen the opposite happen often. The execs be like, I don't have time for this. I don't need it.
Well, I mean, and that's the thing. Well, and I think to Bill's point too, it's less about whether or not you need it or perceive you need it, and more about, does everybody else need you to participate and understand like what's going on? Like that is a fundamental component of leadership, is like leading the fray, leading the charge, and, being that torchbearer from the front that is saying, this is something that we're going to get behind. And we see it all the time. In fact, we just finished a big engagement where we started with the kind of sub-director levels, M1 to M3 level managers. And the last thing that the participants said, we did 3 cohorts with them. And the last thing that the participants said in every cohort is like, when are the directors and VPs getting this same training? Because it's like they were so excited, but I think there was this like tinge of like a fear that they might be let down once they exit the classroom and they won't be like sponsored. Now with that client, they decided to eventually expand, which was a good news story. But I think ideally you would start there, like with engagement from the top, and then kind of roll things out so that you can be able to say, yeah, we're all fully behind this. We all know what's in it. We all had a part in authoring it, and we're invested in making sure that this takes root in our culture. Cool. Any other thoughts here? Cool.
I'll add in a piece too. Very quickly. These are positive touch points too. Like everything that everyone described so far and everything on the screen is a positive touch point. And the classic, you need how many positive touch points for every negative. And I'm not going to ask how many negative touch points we have at work. So just creating an environment where you're creating these positive engagements for your executive leaders to say, hey, I'm a person. Hey, I, also need to learn this, or I have learned it in the past. And Scott, what you talked about, like creating those positive touch points between departments and stuff. It's a very minor thing, but it drives significantly, like on top of the skill.
100%. All right. Well, Michelle, I'm going to leave it with you. So Michelle, Alex, again, she's our head of data and insights here at Unity, and she'll be reviewing some of the common missteps that we see around data and strategy as it pertains to leadership engagements.
Yeah, absolutely. Data and data strategy, it's always a piece that everybody wants. And so we want data and we want to see that strategy piece, but it's often like overlooked and sometimes missed in the training opportunities. So, in order to really clearly communicate the impact or the ROI, you have to have a clear vision of like, what is the change that you're trying to make? And those are conversations that can happen. They're not always as innate, meaning like if I learn how to have a good conversation, how is that going to impact my revenue? But the good news is there's tremendous research out there that continually supports and has made a huge impact in like the last 10 years in organizations where CEOs and executives have clearly understood that, at least from the research, that creating positive experiences, and the well-being of our employees directly impacts the bottom line of everything. So the challenge is, what are the steps unique to your company or to your team? And that will look different for everyone, which is why you need a training that's going to be designed exactly for what you need. It's not just a blanketed off the shelf, but like how Scott, you were saying, this is about our vision and our values. And when you streamline it in that way, it becomes much more clear to see what the ROI and the impact is going to be. When we talk about data, everyone typically thinks of like the end data, like what was the impact? What was the movement? And that's important. I'm not here to take away from that, but we also have to think about data on the front end too. And one of the easiest and most powerful ways to think about data and impact on the front end is utilizing behavior assessments. I talk all day long about how powerful behavioral assessments are. It does two very powerful things. One, it gets you a lot of information very quickly about your people. So if you think about someone that you've been working with for 20 years, you don't need a behavioral assessment on them. You understand what makes them tick, what motivates them, what needs they have in the workplace. But when you get into a leadership role, you very quickly outrun your capacity to understand the years that it takes to get to that information. So when you're able to understand very quickly how detail-oriented someone is, how process-oriented, how people-oriented, what their needs are, it not only drives success in the interventions, but it also drives success systematically after the training has happened. So what that means is you get the information quickly, but it also gives you the language. Because you've taken these assessments together, you're able to use that language to then apply the learning. And that's where you start to see things become systematic and not just within the training or soon after the training, because you're putting tools in the hands of your participants and you're saying, here, go home with this, right? It's a self-reflection tool, which is very powerful. But then you do that in an interactive way with other people. That's where you start to see the impact of the programs go up dramatically, because you're getting information and you're putting tools in the hands of people on the front end. Another way that we think about data and strategy is developing what I call a logic model, which is a form of data strategy. I don't see this term used a lot in corporate, but a logic model is basically a theory of change. So it kind of goes back to like, what are you trying to accomplish and how are we going to get there? If I teach your managers how to have difficult conversations, well, what is that going to do? So when you create a data strategy around your training, you're basically outlining the logic of the change. What is the logic, or what is the path of the journey that someone's going to make? And it happens at different levels, but basically, did they like the training? Most people just stop there. But the next levels are things like, what's the learning? What's the behavior or the action? And then from there, what's the impact? Those are your 4 basic levels. It can go beyond that, but that's your journey. And most people aren't able to put words to that, let alone intention. And when I think about these things together, I always think of do you know the scene in Finding Nemo at the end when they're all in the net and everyone's going, swim down, swim down, swim down? Like, that's what your logic model is. It's saying we all move in this direction. The behavior models give us the language of what direction we're going through or going towards, right? And then your impact and ROI is whatever direction you're moving towards. So all of these data tools from like beginning, during, and after are all designed to kind of funnel or point everyone towards the goal or the behaviors that we're trying
right.
to include.
And Michelle, if I can just jump in here,
Please.
I think it is really telling that you said having a logic model is not something it's not lexicon that's well circulated within corporate circles, which is true, but it's also the main reason why most training effectiveness results are interpretive, right? And that really places talent development leaders at a disadvantage, because if you look at the composition of most C-suites, you've got a lot of really quant heavy C-levels, and then you have the CHRO or the chief people officer who may have some quant skills, but like is just generally like more attuned to the necessity of developing competencies and soft skills. But if there's no data to convince the skeptics in the C-suite, then it becomes really interpretive as to like whether or not like this actually had the impacts. But if you invest before the start of engagement to develop a logic model and agree on the outcomes and the success thresholds, then it becomes unambiguous whether or not that training actually delivered the intended results. But I think like I think the way that I've seen these decisions kind of like work in the C-suite is, hey, we have a skills gap. Let's develop some training. Then the hypothesis is that skills gap will no longer exist, right? And then we move on from there. And adding a data package to one of those engagements is not necessarily, it's seen as like extra cost, but it is actually probably the best investment that most companies can make if there are skeptics like broadly within the executive suite, because it helps them to really kind of see tangible proof of the impact of what's being done in the classroom.
Right. And a little bit of what you're talking about, there's two different types of data. There's explorative or like exploratory data and then confirmatory data. And most of us just want the confirmatory data, like did the thing work, right? And that's fine. But if you can't get to the confirmatory without the exploratory, because one leads into the other, you need both of those pieces. So again, data strategy is around like the before, the during, like it's holistic. And the last point here, failing to incorporate training insights into broader engagement, that's what you were just kind of alluding to, Scott, is how are you taking this and really connecting it to what's happening in the broader scope, right? So if your company is going through change, like what are some of the change goals that you have within the company that you can then attach the training to? What are the values of the company and how can you connect the training to that? And the reason why this is so important is because everything relies on culture. Your movement in your company will move because of culture. So if you're not taking the data from the training and connecting it to the data of your culture, you're missing out on long-term impact. You will remain at short-term impact for the day or the week of the training, unless you connect it to the very foundation of what's moving the company. So when you connect those two data stories together, now you're cooking with fire, right? Like now you're going to start to see something. And then from there, what becomes even more powerful than that is systematic training within your company. Right. So not just saying, oh, let's bring in the training this year. Why? Because our managers are screaming for it. But to create systematic quarterly, 2 times a year, even once a year, now you're creating longevity in your data story. And that's where your numbers start to really tell you something. You can't just make that stuff pop up out of thin air. You need a data strategy to paint that picture.
Mm-hmm. Right. Thank you, Michelle. So, yeah. I mean, with that being said, you can tell Michelle's very passionate about data. But how about y'all? Have you had any experiences with training engagements and data, either the absence of it or stuff that you did to actually grab it, which made a compelling quantitative case for your engagement? What are your thoughts? Or do you find that it's more common that training engagements are actually data light engagements without a lot of data attached?
I think data light. Yeah. In fact, it's been in my career, it's been missing. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if it's a modern concept or if it's just it's not practiced very frequently. And I think when there is data, depending on how the data is collected, sort of like in marketing, there's, so executives can kind of question the data. Like, well, what did you do to get this data? Like, it's like, you know, like this trust thing, like, what did you know, how did you spin this for me? So I think making it very well grounded and I don't know that it has to be verifiable, but believable for sure.
Mm-hmm.
So I think you hit something there, because data and trust very much go hand in hand. And a lot of times the resistance to data, I hear things like, well, we know our employee morale is low, so we don't want to take the time to collect that data. And I get it. You know, executives kind of take it as a personal hit, you know, if data doesn't come back. But like, that's why the exploratory data is so important, because it gives you an opportunity to say, like, you know, if you're an executive, no, it's not you, it's this correlation. And this is clearly connected to a behavior that we can teach in this training. It's very simple, right? And then you see those numbers go up, you know? So I have seen a lot of resistance to the baseline, because it's like, oh, like we're not in a good place. And I get that. So I think it is important to remember that data does come with a sense of vulnerability or authenticity or some of those words. That you need to think about. Like, even at the employee level, when they collect data, there's always a sense of hesitancy. Like, what are you going to do with this data? Who sees this data, right? So that's all very real stuff. But like you talked about in the beginning, Scott, with AI and new technology coming out, like the jury's split a little bit, you know? So we're kind of still in those early stages of how do we handle data, how, you know, protect it and confidentiality and things like that. So it can be sticky, you know? But thank you for pointing it out, because that is a thing.
Totally.
Well, I think I've seen that, Bill, most places is like light on the data logic or the upfront. What are we collecting and how are we measuring effectiveness? At the current place I'm at, I think it's just because the work we do, we have a lot of folks who are very much into data and theory of change. And so we put together a January to June training program for our managers. And before doing that, we had a ton of conversations around how are we measuring the effectiveness of the program, to the point where it was like we almost had too much data, and it was like telling whatever story that person wanted by disaggregating the little piece of data they wanted. So there's also, I don't know, feels like I swing from one extreme to the next. I'm sure there's a medium.
It turns into a validity issue, right? Because with so much data, you can start to paint whatever picture you want. Oof.
Well, I think that really just comes back to calibrating and aligning on what are the results that you want to see up front, and designing your data strategy from day zero to be as unambiguous and uninterpretive as possible, right? It's like, can we all agree that if we measure these facets of training effectiveness, and if we exceed these thresholds or get this % change, that we will consider this to be a worthwhile investment? Right. And if you have that calibration up front, then you kind of dispel all of the, you know, potential jockeying for position afterwards of, you know, weaponizing the data to kind of like just confirm your own biases like at the end. But yeah, that's why it's important to have like a really good data strategy. And I can say this, that like, you know, with regards to, you know, training and leadership development firms that develop their signature training programs, a lot of them don't really have a data strategy. They have an entry ticket, they have an exit ticket, they give you some kind of like thumb on the pulse of like whether people liked it or not. But then in terms of actualizing the impact to your organization, that's all left up to you, right? If it's almost like, you know, when you hire a big box consulting firm to like develop a strategy for you and they give you a deck of 100 slides, I mean, and then they leave, and it's like, it's all up to you to decide whether or not you do anything with that. And we prefer a much more integrated approach.
You know, I think one of the challenges is and I'm not an expert in this at all. I find this very interesting because I have a data background, but not data tied to leadership development. I had this opinion in the past that the real measurement, to me, one of the most valuable measures would come 6 months after training from the supervisor or the leader's manager who is providing assertions and observations that say, you taught Joe and Judy radical candor or conflict management or whatever the skill. And here's examples where I've noticed it and it's made a difference. Like, to me, that's rubber on the concrete. This is working. Versus I took the training yesterday and I get it. I feel like I really understand it. Well, like, that doesn't tell me anything just because somebody said that they get it. You know what I mean?
Right.
So
Totally.
This is an area where I do believe there's a science to it. It's just like how do you really get at it?
Right. And there has to be a willingness to invest in that because, Bill, to Mandy's earlier point, it's more opportunity cost, more potential, lost billable hours if you're working in that kind of environment to justify that. But that type of 360 assessment, right? Like, if you're talking about mid-level leaders, understanding from their senior leadership, from the people that report to them, from the peers that interact with them, whether or not they perceive a noticeable change in those competencies, over time, that is a huge data point that can help you to really justify ROI, but it's fairly simple to collect, not to minimize, Michelle's craft, but it's fairly simple to design and collect. But the problem is foresight and willingness to invest in that up front.
Yeah, the data collection is one piece of maybe 10 steps. So you're right. The collection piece is not difficult, but the planning and the strategy and the method and the follow-up and the analysis and, all of those pieces.
Yeah. Well, and what we see, especially when we work with clients, is like when they've made their mind up that they are in the market for training, it's like, all right, let's buy some training. And like when you say, hey, maybe we should talk about some data, as a part of that to justify it feels like, it feels like an extra step that wasn't in the calculus before, but is so important, especially if you're working in an environment where talent development is not either well supported or their full value is not recognized more broadly beyond the HR suite, which, happens sometimes. And that in those situations, having powerful data to back your story can really, really help maximize your influence in those environments.
What's interesting is that I would imagine the CFOs of organizations want this, but they don't want to pay for it.
That's true. Or they'll pay for it. They'll pay for it if the story comes back that well justifies the incremental investment. Yeah. Well, and not to kind of let's capitalize on that comment a little too much, Bill, but this is why one of the things that we do at Unity is we actually we include in all of our training packages an insights and success showcase. So it's not like the full-blown data package that Michelle is talking about, but it is enough of a quantitative and qualitative package for our clients to basically tell the story of the impact of their training to their internal teams. And we find the feedback that we get from them is that they're so grateful that somebody else is putting together a, quantitative data-backed story that they can use to really kind of justify their investment. And it really helps to create momentum for future investments in future years.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. All right. Well, before we break, if we could go to the next slide, I just want to take a few minutes to share with you all a little bit about our signature leadership training offering. We call it the Catalyst Leadership Experience. The Catalyst Leadership Experience, it consists of 3 days of classroom training, ongoing coaching, and reinforcement, and concludes with insights and a success showcase to help you measure your impact and tell your story internally. Can go to the next slide. This is just a quick zoom in to the classroom curriculum in case you're all curious. You'll see upon a quick scan here that the agenda is chock full of skills and other competencies that are designed to raise the collective bar of performance across the organization. And in fact, we just concluded an engagement with a very well-known, I'm not at liberty to say the name of the company, but it's a very well-known, super fun global entertainment brand. And we achieved a record-breaking NPS score of 87 across 50 of their leadership participants worldwide. And they were so happy with the results that they decided to extend the program to their entire population of 300 plus leaders in the coming year. So if this is something that's interesting to you, or if you're in the market and shopping for a partner to help develop a customized training experience for your leaders, I'd love to make myself available to you. If you go to the next slide. This is our contact information if you want to reach out. And that's all the content we've prepared for today. So I want to thank you guys so much just for your participation, for your insights, for being so generous with your perspectives and the things that you've learned. And the Unity team will be hanging out for a couple more minutes if you have any questions that you want to run by us. But otherwise, thank you guys so much for attending today.